Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the bunker. This will be episode 4 in the secret history of the Jersey Devil, based on the book of the same name by Brian Regal and Frank Esposito. It's been an interesting tale up until this point, and it's going to keep getting more interesting. So essentially, we left off in the early 1900s with a major sighting in the area. There was some mass panic, and basically coming on the heels of the sighting in 1909, and this was a legitimate panic that swept through the area. There were people in the pines that stayed indoors after dark. Police were allegedly pursuing this thing, and on the heels of this comes the chapter of the tale entitled Ninth and Arch. Ninth and Arch was I'm putting in air quotes, museum that was run by, it was run by hucksters and fraudsters. And it was right about this time, early 1900s, that Ninth and Arch, I want to say, we'll call it museum for lack of a better word, but they were experiencing a downturn in ticket sales. Their business was in danger of closing. And so on the heels of this sighting in 1909, they decided to jump on this momentum and capitalize on this sighting and this mania of the Jersey Devil. So the individuals running this establishment hired a Ringling Brothers circus clown named George Hartzell and some of his friends to actually stage a mock monster hunt for this creature. They pretended to go out and capture this thing. The animal trainer was a man named Professor Edwards, secured for them a kangaroo, which they painted up with stripes, and they attached wings to his back, because they figured, with this little bit of makeup and help, this could be made to look a little bit like the Leeds Devil or Jersey Devil. And they put him on display. The following day, the papers printed stories. The Leeds Devil has been captured and is on display at Ninth and Arch. Almost immediately, ticket sales exploded. They ended up collecting thousands of dollars in sales. Ticket holders would see the quote-unquote beast in a cage on a darkened stage. They would get to walk through, see it relatively close. But hidden out of view would be a boy with a little sharp stick, and he would, as the people would file in, he would poke the kangaroo, get it pissed, get it to jump around and scream, and it's horrible. It's torture. That's what they did. And there was a temporary boost in sales, but it was short-lived, and despite all the profits and all the hubbub around the Jersey Devil, it eventually got out that this was a fraud. They were exposed as frauds, and the business closed down shortly thereafter. And the Ninth and Arch, sort of fraud that was exposed, you would think would have sort of put the Jersey Devil story to bed, and people would have stopped taking stock in it because here we thought this was a real thing, and turns out it was just a fraud. People still continue to have sightings of something out there. What is it they're seeing? I mean, I keep going back to that. Because we have these, we have early on, we have the feud between Leeds and the Quakers. We have the continued ongoing feud between his son, Daniel Leeds, and Benjamin Franklin. But all this time, there are strange sightings. So what is this? I think sometimes about the collective consciousness and thought forms and egregores. Like, could our consciousness create something that could be seen out there? And I go back to the Lenape concept of the nature spirit that was seen as a deer-like thing with wings, ridden by a little man, or sometimes seen like a deer. Is that enough belief to put out into the environment to actually manifest something? But all along, down through the years, there was just enough stories and tales, retelling of stories, to just sort of keep the momentum going, keep it going down through the years. So this Jersey Devil thing stayed in the consciousness of the people living in and around the Pines to this day. One of the first confirmed articles about the Pine Barrens itself was in 1859. This was an article by W.F. Myers, who described the Pine Barrens as aboriginal in its savagery. And he called the inhabitants of the Pine Barrens not Pineys, like they're, referred to today, even by Pineys themselves, but referred to as pine rats. There's another article comes out in 1887 retelling the legend, but changing some of the details. In 1905, J. Watkins publishes Demon of the Pines, and this one really seemed to add a lot of fuel to the fire and kick off the whole mania in 1908 and 1909, shortly after this book. And over the years, there's article after article, book after book, continuously mentioning this Leeds Devil, or the Jersey Devil. Unfortunately, but without references or contacts or any kind of evidence that can be drawn upon to prove or disprove the thing. But the tales are still there. So then this Watkins book comes out in 1905. Then 1909 is this mass panic. Sightings everywhere. Strange footprints seen in the snow, some going across rooftops. Obviously some sort of bird leaving the prints. I mean, I think the sandhill crane was believed to be non-existent in this area, but was here. I mean, I've seen them out there. So there's, like I mentioned before, people in the Pines were staying indoors after dark. There were hunting parties from Burlington to Bordentown, even as far west as eastern PA, out looking for this creature. And no one ever found it. One police officer claimed that the Leeds Devil was a jabberwock with coals for eyes and no teeth. Many other people recorded strange footprints in the snow. And of course, if you're looking for what you think is a monster and you see something out of the ordinary, there's a tendency to connect the two when they shouldn't be connected. There's another tale that puts the exiled king of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, into this Jersey Devil legend. Mr. Bonaparte supposedly saw the devil while hunting on his estate in Bordentown, the Point Breeze estate. He fired no shots at the creature, but he did tell local townspeople that he saw it. There's another tale by Commodore Stephen Decatur, who was visiting the Hanover Mills, the forge, inspecting cannonballs, believed to have seen this creature flying in the sky and actually fired a cannon at it, but didn't hit it. And again, no documentation exists to back up these tales, and so they're just tales. No evidence to draw upon. And over the years, I mean, the Jersey Devil's been blamed for all sorts of strange things. Something strange is caught in a fisherman's net. Farmers reporting chickens and goats and things being killed. In the 1950s, there was a forest fire in the pines that revealed a strange carcass that couldn't be identified. So this also allegedly the body of the Jersey Devil. There was a farmer in the 1960s who claimed that a large animal of some kind killed his dog, ducks, geese, and 6 of his cats. And a ransom followed for the capture or killing of the creature, which eventually increased to $100,000, which was quite a sum of money back in the 60s. But again, the creature was never found. No evidence was ever found. A lot of parallels to the Bigfoot phenomenon. Some very, very credible people report some harrowing tales, face-to-face encounters with this thing. But when people rally and go searching for it, they don't find anything. Interesting. The 1950s and 60s brought a sort of renewed interest to the study of, quote-unquote monsters. And cryptozoology becomes a thing. And interestingly, at this point in history, mountain gorillas, silverback gorillas, were considered, you would call them, in the 1800s, you would have called them a cryptid. Until they were discovered in 1847. And up until that point, it was considered a legend or just some monster of folklore or a cryptid. As the 19th century becomes the 20th century, more naturalists and professional, more serious cryptozoologists go out looking for new species, and lo and behold, they're finding new species or species thought to be extinct. And so the subtext to that is, well, okay, we thought this was extinct, we didn't think this existed, but we found this, so we found that. So what else is out there that we haven't found yet? So these naturalists would go out, they would, find new species, discover them, they'd fit them into certain classifications, and those that weren't were sort of, cast aside as just folklore, just stories, just nonsense. But all along, new creature sighting stories were still happening. And one of the more famous ones taking place on October 20th, 1967, and that would be the Patterson-Gimlin footage of Bigfoot, which is still contested to this day. The argument goes on that it's real, it's not real, it was faked, people are still looking at this video. But there's just seemingly always been either a book written, a story told, a television show that just keeps that momentum of this creature going. Even though, like we mentioned in episode 1, Mother Leeds was not a person that existed. And Daniel Leeds, we told his story. So we can see how this legend sort of began. But it's just interesting how the momentum of the mythological creature is what has perpetuated, and not the story, the historical story that sort of started it all. And to this day, there are several groups that organize. They go out and they search for Bigfoot, search for the Jersey Devil every year. And I've spoken to some of these folks, and they have seriously crazy stories about something wild they saw out there. I know people that have just been driving through the pines, not investigating or even thinking about it at all, and had really bizarre things that they saw. So what is it really that we're seeing? That's one of the questions that will remain unanswered with this program. So let's think about some of the ancestors of the Leeds Almanac. I'll get my book out here. Didn't want to hit that light, but let's keep it on for now. Okay. So, what brought this tendency to think about monsters? Well, it turns out that came with the settlers from Europe. Here I'm going to read from page 100. The monsters appearing in American almanacs and books had ancestors. While monsters populated medieval manuscripts in profusion, they also leapt to the pages of printed matter. Woodblock and movable type printing was established in Europe by the 1450s and made monsters even more popular. They would get their wildest exposure through the spread of pamphlets and tracts that were produced quickly, cheaply, and in some numbers. The subject of monsters came in two categories: mythical beasts and monstrous births of animals, especially humans. One of the more popular monsters depicted during the early modern period, the monk calf, and that's the monk calf, first appeared in a pamphlet by Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name, I'm sorry. The Papal Ass of Rome and the Monk Calf of Freiburg included an illustration of the purported creature as a pig-like bipedal beast with layers of flesh hanging from its body. It fitted the anti-Catholic diatribes and prurient rumor-mongering meant to win converts to the Protestant cause by turning them away from the establishment. Now, how interesting is that? So we can see a parallel here to the use of myth and monsters for a political or religious sort of agenda, right? Very similar to the story of Daniel Leeds. And there were many monster writers or naturalists of the time, from the 1600s to the 1800s, they would take an abnormality, like I mentioned the monstrous births a minute ago. They would take an abnormality and they would suggest that it had elements of magic or the supernatural or mythology that made that possible or was responsible for that. Or, the disobedient mother is punished by a monstrous birth, or the Mother Leeds story. It just feeds into that same sort of dynamic. And this practice went on for many years. It set the stage for the Leeds Almanac and also for the treatment of monsters, which came to the New World with the Europeans. I will turn now to page 102. Martin Luther's pamphlet proved a popular model for later authors who used monsters as hammers against the Catholic Church and monarchy in general, and to remind readers of God's ever-present power. So it's a fear element that was, at play in the background. And further down here on page 102, in a certain relation of a hog-faced woman from 1640, great news from Saxony, or a new and strange relation of the mighty giant Corbmap, 1680, and a most strange but true account of the very large sea monster, 1704. Theologians and other self-appointed moralists felt obliged to remind their audiences, mostly poor and barely illiterate peasants and working-class people, that God watched them in their little affairs and would bring down swift and terrible judgment on them in the form of a monster. Only rarely did the monster pamphleteers single out a noble or a wealthy family. It was the lower classes who were most prone to producing monsters. So there's a theme that we still see to this day, where the individuals making the rules seem to be exempt from them, but we all as working people and the poors certainly are not. Very, very interesting. The monstrous birth narrative, which I mentioned in an earlier episode, was already in the consciousness of Europeans coming to the New World from the stories of Annie Hutchinson and Mary Dyer. And the most learned of people who are well read would have read these stories and have known this, maybe told the stories to their kids. But there was a shift with this whole narrative of these monstrous births and you know, God punishing people with monsters. And that came initially in the form of an Italian gentleman. That man is Lichetti. His name is Lichetti. He was born in 1577, passed away in 1657. He was a learned Italian man. He had a doctorate in philosophy, also had a medical degree. And he was interested in the malformation of people and animals at an embryonic level. And his book, I'm going to try to pronounce this, De Monstrum Natura Causis et Differentis Libri Duo. I think I butchered that, but it came out in 1616, and this would have been published right before settlers began flooding into East and West Jersey. And he has many, you know, monstrous images in his book. But he argued, Lichetti argued, that the deformities weren't the result of some, you know, God's wrath or demonic or supernatural reasons, but that were a biological reason. And he made these arguments at the time because many people at the time thought the exact opposite. That if you defied God, if you defied the king, if you stepped out of line, you would be punished by, you know, being born deformed or have a deformed child. And cheap pamphlets and broadsheets about monsters were widely distributed throughout Europe before the settlers came to East and West Jersey, and so it was already in the minds. The seeds were already planted for a monster story to take place here in the New World, which, like I mentioned earlier about this, the forest, the unknown areas of the world become the maze, or become the cave you fear to enter, right? So it's not surprising if these characteristics were just transferred right to this quote-unquote Leeds devil or Jersey devil. There were some relatives of the Jersey devil, or other mythological creatures at this time. One of them was called the Snallygaster, from the South Mountain region of Frederick County, Maryland. It also first appears in 1735. It has a similar anatomy, a horse-like body, bat wings, hooves, and a tail. There is the Popabawa of Africa, the Pembe Island region of Tanzania. This one appears in the mid-1990s. Similar body shape to the Jersey Devil, but is also reportedly a shapeshifter. This one sounds more sinister, though. It was said to attack people and animals, even commit sexual assault on people. It was said that reciting from the Quran were able to repel the creature. Some interesting parallels there to the, you know, stories of people here witnessing shadow people and reciting Bible verses or calling on the name of Jesus or saying a prayer, which seems to make the things go away. It's an interesting conversation to be had there. Does this mean the things being seen are only in that person's mind? Do we have the power to actually take something only in the mind and make it real? Do we have the power to repel negative things? Very interesting. I'm going to turn now to the epilogue of the book, beginning on page 114. Excellent book, by the way. I haven't mentioned it recently, but I suggest getting this book and reading it. It's excellent. A lot of history and context provided. It's awesome. Anyway, here we go. Where do monsters come from? Do they come from our collective psyche? Do they arise from genetic disorders? Are they the products of business expediency? Are they cobbled together from religious, ethnic, political intolerance? The story of the Jersey Devil results from all of this, but it also derives from the story of a family thrown onto the pyre of popular culture, mostly by people who had no idea what they were doing. Blank slates are the easiest to write on. By virtue of his publications being lost, intentionally destroyed, wiped away, and forgotten, the memory of Daniel Leeds and his family became almost a blank slate. Most of the quote-unquote facts attached to the Jersey Devil legend have nothing to do with reality. As with so many historical personages, much about the Leedses has been lost and covered over. Even their final resting places are unknown. The disappearance of Daniel Leeds extends not only to his books and ephemeral works, but also to his body. It is widely accepted that he was buried in the cemetery of St. Mary's in Burlington. A search of church archives and the grounds themselves, however, show no signs that he's interred there. I myself looked, I didn't find him. Likewise, his father, Thomas Leeds, long thought buried in the Quaker burial grounds in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, has no records or headstone verifying the fact. Titan's grave also remains elusive. The Jersey Devil, on the other hand, still lives. Saying the story no longer has any relevance or interest, as Charles Montgomery Skinner did in 1903, underestimates the enduring character of the tale. Enthusiasts will continue to trapeze around the forest looking for a monster, and eyewitnesses will continue to swear that they have seen the creature cavorting among the pines. Myth often has a longer lifespan than reality, and so much reality surrounding the story has been forgotten. Priorities of the narrative, as they always do, have changed over the course of time. The quarrels, fights, and animosities that seemed so important in the 18th century no longer held sway in the 19th. The Quaker rivalries, the political wrestling, the Almanac Wars, Daniel, Titan, and the monstrous Leeds family crest faded from memory, like paint chips flaking away from a wall mural, leaving a distorted version of the original image. The text through which this conflict played out passed into obscurity, leaving little behind to tell the real story. Leeds' scandal-ridden writings, the trumpet sounded and the great mystery of the Foxcraft, attacked Quakerism and its founder, and resulted in the destruction of many of Leeds' publications. As prominent citizens, both Daniel and Titan must have engaged in extensive correspondence, yet virtually none of it survives. Though their public battles with publishing rivals, Daniel found himself accused of being Satan's harbinger, while Benjamin Franklin accused Titan Leeds of being a ghost resurrected from the grave. Daniel Leeds, by virtue of his supposed heresy, his breaking with the Quaker community to join the opposition, his outspoken anti-Quaker views, his almanac writing, and his siding with the royal government made him a political and religious monster to his neighbors. By the early 20th century, the Leeds Devil and its fragile memory, remodeled by sensational media reportage, had become the Jersey Devil, while Mother Leeds, as much a phantom as her offspring, materialized out of the snow-covered mists surrounding Leeds Point. The Jersey Devil came into being from the collision of several different streams of history. The religious strife and bare-knuckled political maneuverings of the Keithian Schism, and the pamphlet and almanac wars of the colonial era placed Daniel and Titan Leeds in a position to be accused of occult activity. This later melded nicely with the Native American traditions of forest dragons and spirit beings to produce the Leeds Devil, which in turn found himself modified by a legion of other monster legends from home and abroad. By the turn of the 20th century, this legend, now completely divorced from the actual Leeds family, was grafted onto strange tracks in the snow and then promoted by a dime museum. When Charles Bradenberg and Norman Jeffries constructed the Jersey Devil myth, they did not maliciously intend to tarnish the Leeds family name or an important part of American history. Nor did they think they had created a long-running legend. They just wanted to lure paying rubes into their funhouse. The story continued to be propagated by amateur folklorists, such as Francis Baisley Lee, and particularly Henry Carlton Beck. Since then, a legion of ghost and monster hunters have pursued the case by looking for an actual biological entity that they think has been alive since 1735. At the same time, the paranormal echo chamber combined with social media outlets to spread stories that paid little attention to verification, facts, veracity, or even common sense. Today, you need not go to the Pine Barrens to hear the call of the Jersey Devil. You can hear it while watching misleading political attack ads, or reality television, or internet hype about ghosts, monsters, or other pseudo-scientific claims. The Jersey Devil whispers a warning, not about the horrors of darkened forests, but of darkened hearts. It warns against false accusations, the demonizing of political opponents or individuals because of their differences, of scapegoating, and about the tragedy of lost and forgotten history. Ghost hunters and monster enthusiasts have traveled the back roads of the Pine Barrens for years and have reported encountering many unusual things. One of the great curiosities of the hunt for the Jersey Devil is that, with all the sightings of footprints and glowing red eyes, and hearing shrill screams, and the photographing of strange beasts fluttering about the forests of New Jersey, no one has ever reported the ghost of a man in Quaker garb. If they want to be historically accurate, monster hunters might consider that the apparitions they think they see, not of some winged phantasm, but of the forlorn figure of Daniel Leeds standing on a lonely, tree-lined trail as the snow falls. Well, I think it's first of all very well written, and I think sort of those few paragraphs just encapsulates the push and the motivation of this book, and so therefore of this episode. And look, I'm someone who investigates paranormal activity, and legit paranormal activity exists. But the minute I go attaching intent or some sort of specific type of creature or entity to things I experience would be disingenuous, because I can't prove any of it. I want to thank you once again for joining us for this series on the secret history of the Jersey Devil. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time in the bunker.